Hello, this is my intercultural communications video, and the article that I chose was Shakespeare in the Bush. So, the main idea of the article is that stories, including Hamlet, are interpreted differently in different cultures. In the story, Laura travels to West Africa, bringing the story of Hamlet by Shakespeare to share with the African tribe. Before leaving, she was told by a friend to be careful, for this culture could easily misunderstand the concepts of the story. However, Laura figured the messages were universal. Hamlet explores common emotions like grief, betrayal, love, and revenge, so she wasn't worried. Once she arrived, she learned that their village life revolves around drinking beer and storytelling, so once she's asked to tell a story, she describes the tale of Hamlet. As she tells the play, she's repeatedly interrupted by the people of the tribe giving their own cultural opinion. For example, when Hamlet's father returns as a ghost, they are confused and insist it was witchcraft, zombie, or an omen. This just goes to show the impact of different worldviews changes the interpretation of cultural meanings. When she told the story to the tribe, they understood it very differently. They also thought Claudius marrying Gertrude was the right thing to do and not something seen as shameful. They also believed madness could only come from witches and that Ophelia could not have drowned, or Hamlet wouldn't want revenge without magic being involved. They also asked why the king didn't have more wives to prepare for when guests visited. She had to explain that kings had servants and taxes to take care of such events. This goes to show that different cultures and people don't understand stories in the same way, but fit their ideas to fit their own culture. The article makes it clear that that worldview strongly shapes how people find meanings in stories, even the ones we might assume are universal. Because Laura assumed the themes would be interpreted identically across all people, coming from an English background, she views Shakespeare as timeless and a necessity for understanding human nature. For the tribe, a phenomenon such as ghosts, remarriage, and madness could be explained within their own cultural beliefs. At first, it seems that they are misunderstanding the play, but in reality, they were just applying their own worldview to the story to make sense to them. Laura's assumption that her perspective would be universal and right shows bias because she has placed her own tradition above theirs. This goes to show that an individual's worldview can limit their knowledge of other cultures. The story challenges the idea that one cultural's values are normal or best by showing how differently people can interpret the same story. Laura thought that Hamlet made sense worldwide and that her way of understanding it was the right one. But when the elders explained the events using their own beliefs about family, witchcraft, and authority, their version made just as much sense in their culture as hers did in hers. This shows that no single culture has the only correct way of seeing the world. What feels normal or obvious in one place may seem strange somewhere else. The story reminds us that cultural values are not universal but shaped by society in which we grow up. Instead of assuming our values are the best, we can learn from other perspectives and understand that normal depends on culture. I feel like a unique norm in my culture is tipping. Specifically in the US, leaving a 15 to 20% tip is the norm and considered very polite. It shows our appreciation for the service and it helps support the waiters. For me, tipping is natural and I don't ever question it. However, in other countries, they may see this practice differently. For example, in Japan, leaving a tip is not expected and might even be considered a rude gesture because having good service is part of the job and not something that needs to be rewarded. In other countries, service workers have higher wages, so tipping can seem unnecessary. For their worldview, they might even wonder why customers pay extra when they've already been paying for the meal. This shows that something feels completely normal in my culture can be viewed as strange, rude, or inappropriate in another. I think the best way to practice for communication across cultures is to have an open mind and not to make assumptions too fast. To clarify any differences, it is okay to ask questions. Another tip would be to listen very carefully and be willing to approach things with a different point of view. In the article, Laura was scared and timid at first to tell a story. She says, and I quote, "I protested that I was not a storyteller. Storytelling is a skilled art among them. Their standards are high and the audience is critical and vocal in their criticism. Maybe in her culture, storytelling isn't a practiced skill. Having to hear criticism in another culture also can be scary because you don't want to come off as offensive. By being open and respectful, communication leads to a deeper understanding instead of confusion. A personal experience of cultural misunderstanding that I've had was when I went to one of my friend's grandmother's houses when I was younger. Usually when visiting my grandma, we were allowed to be messy and loud like kids do. However, my friend's grandmother was just way more strict, and we had to stay quiet, clean, and overly respectful. This was out of my norm, but out of respect, I had to change my behavior to accept her rules. It reminds me of in the article, when she first mentioned ghosts, they were confused and kept interrupting her, insisting that it was the omen. Later in the story, an elder asked, quote, "Was the omen true?" "Yes," I said, "abandoning the ghost and the devil, a witch sent omen it would have to be." At this point, she stopped correcting them because she knew that's how they would understand the story or understand the context of the story better. Just like me, I had to accept that. Even though they were saying different things, it made sense to them. The most important lesson I learned from this article is that the way people are raised shapes their worldview and changes the way they perceive things. What may seem obvious in one culture may be completely abnormal behavior in another. After reading the text, it helped remind me that when communicating across different cultures, we need to remove the idea of our perspective is the only right one. Instead, we should keep an open mind to other interpretations and take note that other people's beliefs guide how they see the world. Recognizing this prevents misunderstandings while also allowing us to appreciate the richness and learn about different cultures. And that's all I got.